Welcome to an episode of Coach's Corner University. With me today, we have Amanda Rizo, who is I guess I'll let you define what you do better with 3DMJ, but as of right now, you are the practicing psychologist on the team that helps people with any type of eating disorders or anything that may present themselves along those lines with the 3DMJ crew. And if you guys are interested in learning a little bit more about Amanda beyond this conversation here, she's done some really great interviews with the guys on their podcast, the 3DMJ podcast. And that's how I originally have heard of you. And I've been following you for a little bit over a year now, although you don't really post too much on social media
I don't.
with the idea of like educational type stuff that a lot of the other people are getting into that field do. But whenever time you have a podcast come up, I learned so much from it. So if you could just kind of, one, thanks for coming on the show, and then two, define a little bit clearer your role within the 3DMJ and like what you do for a living.
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really honored and excited to spread what it is I do. Um, what it is I do, I'm a mental health consultant on the 3D Muscle Journey team. And what that means is I consult with the coaches as far as what sorts of issues might be coming up for their athletes, or whatever is coming up in the fitness community. So we discuss subjects that typically revolve around the psychology of fitness, what athletes can encounter, including their challenges. And so I'm not exclusively a therapist for 3DMJ athletes. I actually have my own private practice. It is called Allow Your Wellbeing. And I'm based in Long Beach, California. So I am licensed within California. However, I can provide life coaching to anyone across the world.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. The idea of being licensed within the state of California, does that allow you to do like online consultations, or is there limitations within the scope of that?
Right. Good question. Um, Legally, I'm only allowed to practice therapeutic services within the state of California, but I can provide life coaching, which is a more broad and general scope of therapeutic practice and healing, to the public.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because I know if people are interested in reaching out to you, they can do that. And I know Kaylee reached out to you before,
Mhm.
and you guys did some Skype stuff. So I just wanted to make sure that there was no like ethical or illegal bounds
No, no,
of
I
provide.
make sure to clarify that in the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of therapy, there's a lot of stigma attached to it as possibly being a negative thing, right? Like you go to therapy because
Certainly.
there's something wrong with you, but also it's starting to be a little bit more shined in a positive manner with a lot of people educating on the benefits of therapy beyond just the stigma of it having to come with a negative connotation to it. So in terms of defining therapy for people and why it might be a benefit, just kind of go there a little bit and like parse out the idea of therapy and who it's for and why it can be a good thing for almost
Yeah.
anyone.
Yeah, I think for a long time, therapy has been perceived as something bad, something that you get when you're just like not psychologically well. And certainly that is a time to get help. However,
Right.
it does not have to get to that extreme. I really like to see therapy as just some a tool that we can use to expand ourselves and grow, work through challenges as well as relationship challenges, work challenges. And it could be more so like a checkup, like a doctor's checkup. You know, you go to the dentist and every once in a while, there might not be anything wrong with your teeth, but you still want to check and see that things are well. And so in the evolution of psychology, we've come to see that come to see the correlation between the body as well as the mind. And so now it's become more accepted to go to therapy and see it as something a lot more neutral and healthy.
Yeah, I definitely think being within the fitness industry and like having the ability to do the one-on-one coaching, you understand that very few people feel like they have the opportunity to ever be heard. A lot of people feel like they're discourse and conversations throughout their day to day are very superficial, and it's nice to
Yeah.
have the conversations, but it may not be the best approach to do it with your personal trainer for the hour that you have with them. So being around a
Right.
therapist can allow you, just to be heard, and to be heard in a way that doesn't create a lot of judgment. I think that's one of the biggest fears that a lot of people have to opening up, is the fear of being judged by others, and providing that kind of resource for them
Mhm.
to do that is something that's huge. And I'm guessing when you first introduce yourself to someone, the idea is to find a way for them to be able to feel free to open up and communicate. So how do you go into a conversation like that, to allow for a non-judgmental feel for the person?
Most of the time, I just allow the person to be. I don't try to insert myself and say, like, you need to change this, you need to change that. I'm more so sort of like, I don't know, this kind of like constant, steady presence for them, even though I might be collaborating in some sort of discussion. Um, it's more so like a sounding board. So they start hearing their own message that I give back to them, and they start piecing together, oh, this is what I want, and this is what I want to change. And they get their own answers. And that usually creates a very safe environment for the person, knowing that they are mostly in control and in the lead. I will chime in here and there, provide suggestions, but this is mostly for them. Like, this is their time.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like a guided journaling approach with a
Yes.
human being, right? Where they can kind of parse out, you allow them to parse out the ideas a little bit better based on your knowledge, but it's pretty much them guiding the entire thing, right?
Right. And that's the difference between talking to maybe your personal trainer for therapy versus a therapist. Therapists are trained to be very objective and remove themselves out of the picture. So it's just you, and you're constructing your own reality essentially. It's kind of like a brainstorming time.
Yeah, which I think can be effective in terms of just like day-to-day communication with people as
Hmm.
well, right? Not to not be so defined by this idea of like judgment and things of that nature. And one of the things you see a lot with therapy being portrayed in like television and stuff is like the therapist turns their back to the patient, or they write
You're
something.
scribbling notes.
Right. And you're like, what is this
I'm
person writing?
diagnosing you.
Right, exactly. So when in terms of like trying to create that environment for them, what have you found to be the best approach
Yes.
to even like just external environment as well, to create an open-ended conversation?
Hmm. I typically steer very far away from very hard clinical descriptions and language. I think that's just it's it's useless, not useless, but it's not therapeutic in the dynamic. That is not just
Mm.
how we interact in the day to day life. It is helpful. It is a tool, but I completely remove that from the session, and I think clients find that very comforting because it's not like this sort of hierarchy role where I'm like the superior and they're just coming in for help. That is the initial dynamic, but I like to make it a lot more collaborative.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Because it's the same thing, like to relate it to the training aspect. If somebody comes in and you're naming body parts and you're naming all these medical terms and you're talking over their head, they're not going to understand
Yeah,
conceptually any
yeah,
of
they're
that,
not going to
right?
connect.
Yeah, yeah. So in
Right.
terms of dealing with a lot of the athletes that you deal with and working within the fitness community, one of the biggest things, especially within the bodybuilding community that you have to deal with, and even in, I guess, weight class restricted communities of
Mhm.
sports participants, is the idea that food plays such an integral role in the development of these athletes, whether it be through food deprivation to get as lean as possible or to make a weight class, or the idea of overeating to become as big as you can. What are some of the biggest things that you've seen within the industry that kind of drive this negative
Mhm.
perception around food? Like, what are some of the things we're doing as communicators and as industry people that are creating these negative perceptions around food?
Yeah, I think that there are obviously several variables that play into that. Um, and a big one is the perfectionism characteristic that pretty much pervades most of the fitness industry. There's like this seeking tendency of like looking for a certain image, certain rewards, certain accolades, and food is a symbol of that because that is what we use to control this external variable, our body or our performance, if we're powerlifters. Um, and so we, with our fears and anxiety around failure, around rejection, around um, just not being good enough, we channel all of that energy into the food. And so we become obsessed around it. And so with that obsession comes identification, and then it becomes very difficult to separate our emotions and ties to this behavior that we have around food, whether it's restricting or binging or just putting on mass, whatever patterns you may have. And we make it like as if this is going to bring us the happiness. Is this making sense? I know I'm
Yeah.
like
No, no, it is. It
I'm
is.
going in different directions, but um yeah, we put food on this sort of pedestal, and we give it all this power and control, when in reality I've noticed that with all of my clients that once they relax around food, a lot of things shift. Their body composition shifts, um, even relaxing around exercising. If they're not like in the gym weightlifting 5 times a week, they allow themselves to bike ride even.
Yeah.
um, their physique changes and they're a lot more relaxed, and they don't like freak out if they're dining out with family at a restaurant.
Right. Yeah. One of the biggest things is kind of the, like you said, the type A personality is creating this like all or nothing. I have to be perfect. And if I'm not perfect, then I can just derail myself completely, right? And I've been
Yeah,
told this through working with nutritionists as well. Like I've worked with one guy who told me as soon as you eat something unhealthy for you, your body immediately goes into like a fat storage mode, and you might as well just binge and eat and get it all out and then go back to being on track the next day, right? And it's this idea that it perpetuates, well, if I've already messed up, quote unquote messed up, then I might as well
yeah.
just get it all out now because I'm going to have to restrict myself again starting tomorrow. So how do you overcome that all or nothing kind of mentality, or what have you seen to be one of the better approaches to create
Yeah,
that lax approach to nutrition that would alleviate a lot of the stress and anxiety that comes with food?
yes, yeah, that whole black and white catastrophic thinking is it's strong and it has a lot of energy around it. And we can see this in other areas in our life where we have this sort of pendulum effect where, all right, I'm going to binge because I already messed up, might as well go all out. And then the next day I'm going to restrict fully. And so it doesn't matter what end of the polarity you're in, you're going to continue creating that dynamic. And so to stop that pendulum effect, we first want to simply bring awareness to when that moment arises where you want to like, jump the gun and binge or whatever it is. Notice it arise, not necessarily do anything, just bring attention and awareness to it. And then that's when we can start really exploring our internal world and notice what are the triggers? What are my emotions around it? What are my thoughts around it? And notice all of these patterns that are creating this behavior. And so once we have identified all of those points, then we can start shifting them. And then little by little, that pendulum effect starts to dissipate and we meet back in the middle. Um, but attention, awareness, and looking at it as simply feedback instead of like, this is good, this is bad, I should do this, I shouldn't. Simply just like objective, okay, this is feedback. I don't really like this, but it happened and it's okay. I want this instead. And then just simply redirect yourself and shift into that more.
Yeah, with the awareness thing, are there some type of cues or some type of directive you want to provide for yourself? Like, I've read a couple of the books on disordered eating and the idea of like bringing awareness to hunger and whether or not it's non-hungry eating or if it's just boredom or anything like that. And it was kind of asking yourself the questions of like, do I really want this right now or do I need this? And being able to discern between need and want, and if you're really hungry or if you're not. Have you found any cues or any mantras or anything like that to help bind, like bridge that gap of here's awareness and now I need something to bind to that so that I can have a little bit more quantifiable discernment instead of just awareness in and of itself?
Yeah, I think that could be more on an individual basis.
Mhm.
Because some people might say like I'm safe, I'm okay, I don't need to do anything. Um, some people want to jump into some sort of distraction if it's
Mhm.
too overwhelming for them. Um, some people need to talk to someone else. It varies. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I could see it. A lot of interindividuality within
right.
everything that we do. But the idea of awareness is the most important part, right? Because I think for a lot of people, by having that awareness, I've always told people, you know, if you do decide to eat and you consider it as an off meal plan or a cheat, whatever you want to call it, right? I think we'll talk about that too, word and the connotations that words can have in the association. But if you decide to do that, bringing some type of awareness to why you're doing it, like, you know, understanding that like enjoy what you're trying to eat, don't just consume to consume, but you know, try to enjoy every bite that you have of that, and then ask yourself after every bite, do I want more? Do I need more? Am I hungry, or did this sustain me for now? And just by having those type of, you know, approaches to each bite
Yeah.
will, one, allow you to like slow down, right? Because a lot of people are like, I just want to eat. The faster I eat, the less full I'll get immediately, so then I can just eat more. But then eventually it's like you're not even tasting
Oh boy.
what you're eating, right? You're just eating
Yeah.
to eat, right? So have you noticed that with a lot of people, the idea? Because I know a lot of coaches perpetuate this idea of like, you get a cheat meal and you get an hour and eat whatever you want. What are some of the negative ramifications of like ideology like that? And then also too, if you are going to make that switch to maybe a more um, intuitive type embrace of, you know, there's no bad food, it's just whatever can fit. How do you get people on board with that who are so negatively against that?
Yeah. Experience is the greatest learning lesson. And so small incremental exposure therapy
Mm,
sessions, if you will, are excellent to remove that fear that a lot of people have. Um, I am not supportive about like hard ideologies. Um, I would say like bringing the awareness and attention can be coupled or is most highly recommended to be coupled with non-judgmental perception of it all. Um, and and then when we ground ourselves in our bodies, because usually when we're in those mental states, they are mental states, and so we have all of this buzzing in our head, like, okay, I should have finished this in an hour, or should I just like stop and watch a movie and binge watch? It's just like it's never ending. So first, bringing the attention and awareness can give us that pause where we can settle back into our bodies and say we are in the middle of a binge, and we're having these thoughts of should I stop, should I keep going. The best thing to do is like really ground yourself in your body and feel what your body is feeling, because there is no separation between your thoughts and what you are feeling in your body. A lot of us are very cut off from that signal, but there's so much intelligence in our body, and when we start paying attention to that and respecting that, we can see that we won't binge at all anymore. Yeah.
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
where intuitive eating comes in.
Right. So before we get into that, some of the nomenclature that we tend to tell ourselves as like athletes, right? Because I get this all the time. I had an athlete check in today, and it's like I had, you know, pizza last night with my family for the Super Bowl, and I screwed everything up. I messed everything up, right? I fucked up this weekend. This entire week is gone, and they have this negative connotation with their idea that they weren't able to be a perfect robot and stick to the plan,
Hmm.
perfectly, right? And then also the idea of, do you call it a cheat meal? Do you call it a free meal? Like, how do you pick the right words? Or I guess, what are some negative words that we should maybe kind of not use in our vocabulary to help the athletes understand that,
Yeah.
eating off plan is, there's no such thing as eating off plan as long as there's certain variables to look at, right?
Yeah. It's really all in your perception, and I think examining what certain words mean to you is really important. Um, in general, the word cheat has a negative connotation. So, yes, we want to steer clear from that. I would recommend something just as open and non judgmental as possible. If we can see things in that way, the less stress less anxiety, the less perfectionism we tend to instill on it. Because, yeah, like you were saying, the word cheat has the connotation of going off plan, and then we're doing something wrong, and then we messed up, and then we start that whole cycle. So it's something that you need to be honest with yourself with. Is this behavior, is this way of perceiving whatever it is that I'm perceiving something that's helping me, or is this causing like certain anxieties and stress in my life?
Yeah. No. And then in terms of dealing with like the person that's been kind of force fed these ideas of like there's only one way to get lean, like if they have a meal plan, right, and that's like, this is the meal plan you follow and this is how you got lean, so this is what you should always follow to always get lean, right? Like you should only get lean off of chicken and broccoli. So people that understand that ideology, how do you get them to buy into the fact that like maybe I can get lean off of different foods, or maybe because we're so focused on like optimal and what's the best, right?
Yeah,
So we think like, well, if I have a piece of chocolate with this meal, then I'm not going to get as lean. It's not as good as it could be, right? So how do you get people to like switch that mindset of maybe, what is optimal and how do you define that, and can you still reach your goals? Right, they're going into uncharted
yeah,
territory, so how do you help with that anxiety and things like that?
yeah. The word optimal is, I think in the science community, it has like a hard label, like this is it, this is optimal, and this is what you need to do. But those results were produced in a very controlled environment. And so they're mostly guidelines. We're humans, we're very different and complex beings. So we have to follow guidelines, certainly. And this is helpful. But we don't need to like crucify ourselves to stay on point with that. We want to feel more flexible and more relaxed around it. So maybe chocolate for someone is something that is helpful and better for them and optimal.
Yeah. Have you, with dealing with the guys at 3DMJ and things of that nature, being able to walk through that entire process with them, is there points within their coaching where they have to be a little bit more strict on the dietary stuff? Or is it always the idea of variety and free flow in nature? And is there a point where you have to be a little bit more dogmatic in your approach to
Right.
get the results that you want?
Right. I would say 99% of the time, and this is arbitrary. This is just a general feeling. I would refer to the coaches directly. Um, 99% of the time, it's okay to be flexible. Flexible. The times that we probably do need to be very rigid and very on point is like when you're weeks away from a contest prep or some sort of competition.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not that serious.
Right.
Yeah.
Whatever, I guess, allows you to stay within the guidelines as much as possible is what you want, right? The idea of creating stress and anxiety over too could also negate some of the positive effects
Yeah.
that being so rigid and strict on a plan could have, right? Because I mean, stress can lead to water retention, can lead to an inability to
Hmm.
drop any extra weight or drop fat, can actually start to cause you to gain weight without,
Yeah.
discerning from the plan. So I guess whatever allows you to adhere with the minimal amount of stress as possible is kind of the basic understanding and guideline of like the flexible eating approach.
Hmm. Yeah, the person just needs to be like really in tune with themselves and honest with themselves, because some people can function just fine, like eating out of Tupperware, and it's not stressful. Um, Eating out of Tupperware, like at family events, for example, year round. Um, some people, they do that and they're still very anxious and they fear people's judgments. Oh my God, what are they going to think of me? So that's a time to like really examine, like, is this really optimal for me? Right.
Right, because you're comparing optimal of staying on plan with optimal of judgment and anxiety and the
Yeah, lifestyle.
consequences of that, right?
Yeah.
You may stay on plan while you're in front of your family and with your Tupperware, but it creates so much stress and anxiety that as soon as you get home, you binge anyways, right? And
Yeah.
how much better would that have been to just eat with your family, relax, and not have to worry about what you're going to do afterwards, too,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I
Exactly.
also think too, communication is really important when it comes to integrating family and life within your lifestyle, right? Understanding that if you're on this trajectory and your family may not be within the healthiest realm, to be able to communicate with them and be like, hey, I'd love to come over and eat with you guys. Is there any way you could cook something like a steak or something like that on the grill? How do you
Yeah.
approach those type of endeavors, like with family events and being able to not have such a stressful environment? Because I mean, I come from a Colombian family where if we have a family event, it's like rice and butter and
Yeah.
beans and fat, like they don't cut anything off. So how do you talk to a family and be able to express to them like, hey, I want to be around you guys, I want to enjoy it, but I also have some type of boundaries I have to stay within. I have some
Mhm.
guidelines.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because I come from a Cuban background, and aren't any macro friendly foods within the
Right.
cuisine at all. But we still find ways to enjoy that.
Hmm.
Um, and honestly, communication is the greatest help in relieving that stress and tension that could be present in those situations. And also in the way that we approach it. If we come at it with like a very open, compassionate, like excited, like, hey, I would love to join you guys at this event. I've got this and this going on. Would you guys have certain options for me, or can I provide you with it when I come? I think having that very open approach can help relax first yourself as well as others, rather than coming in like, oh, are they going to judge me? I hope they don't say anything. Am I going to look weird? That just creates all of this certain energy like around you, and then people are going to interact with you in that same energy because they're feeding off of it.
Right. And I think also too, as athletes, we tend to only look at our side of the picture in the equation. It's
Mm,
like, I hope they don't judge me. Meanwhile, you're judging them with the way you
yeah,
talk to them too. It's like, hey, you guys eat really unhealthy, and I just want to be, I don't want to be as fat as you guys, pretty much is what you're saying. So it's like, can you make some healthier food? It's like, that's not really the greatest way to communicate to them either.
no,
It's
not at
right.
all. Yeah, there's no like superiority in the way we eat. It's just choices, it's preferences,
Yeah, so
right?
there's strong correlation, I guess, to the way we bring awareness to that and communicate with that with like our day-to-day lives, right? To,
Yeah.
we don't want to be judged, and yet we tend to kind of judge others if they don't meet within our lifestyle parameters, but to have an open mind to everything will allow for everyone to kind of be on the same page with it, right? Because you get
Hmm.
that a lot. I go to places and they're like, "Oh, you're just eating with us today," and it's like, well, yeah, I'm just eating with you guys today. Like
Yeah.
there's points in my life where I won't eat with you guys, and there's points in my life where I will, and like there's no boundaries to it. It's just whether or not I decide to, right? It's all up to
Yeah.
me as a person. And I think having that um creating that autonomy within yourself to make those decisions, I think, is the most important thing. Instead of letting the food dictate who you are, you're able to dictate yourself around that type of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
When dealing with someone who is having a really hard time with this mindset of like flexibility, shifting more towards an intuitive approach, right? Maybe they're getting towards the end of their career, or maybe, they're getting towards the end of a competition and they're like, I just want to start to interact a little bit better and healthier with food and be a little bit more intuitive. Besides awareness, have you found any other strategies to kind of help guide those type of decisions within people?
Mhm. Help guide the decision making.
Yeah, kind of help them ease into the idea of intuitive eating and the idea of flexibility. And say you have someone who's been on that dogmatic approach of chicken and rice, and they're having a hard time giving that up. Besides bringing awareness, how have you found to help people with that transition
Right.
period?